なたのすべてが好きよ好きよ好きよ好きよ好きよ一番好きよ
Urusei Yatsura Reborn Episode 11 Escape Across the Multiverse, Part 4. Ataru and Shinobu were still tightly bound and gagged as they tumbled helplessly through a massive tunnel of energy. Their bodies spun over and over until, at last, the blinding light began to fade. A heartbeat later, they were hurled out of the vortex, crashing hard onto the ground. They rolled across the grass like spinning tops before finally coming to a complete stop. With considerable effort, Ataru managed to loosen one of the ropes that the Lum from the alternate universe had tied so tightly. Once he freed one hand, he quickly untied the rest of the knots, then hurried over to release Shinobu as well. Deep red marks covered both their wrists and ankles. What a landing! Shinobu groaned as she stretched her sore muscles. The first thing I'm doing when we get home is taking a long bath. I think I'll spend the whole afternoon soaking in the tub. Slowly, Ataru looked around, trying to figure out where they had arrived. It was nighttime. They were standing inside a park, but the darkness made it difficult to recognize anything around them. The two began walking through the streets, growing more confused with every step. The first thing that caught their attention was the incredible number of cars still driving around at such a late hour. Most of them were gray, black, or dull metallic colors, nothing like the bright, colorful vehicles they knew back home. Hey, Shinobu, those things look like UFOs, Ataru joked, pointing at their smooth, futuristic shapes. Just then, Shinobu looked up. Ataru, look! A gigantic holographic shark leaped between the skyscrapers, trying to swallow an enormous hamburger made entirely of light. Ataru's eyes widened. It must be some kind of advertisement. He glanced both ways along the street. I'm going to look for a phone so we can call home. I'll check this side. You go around the park. Let's meet back here. The two headed off in opposite directions. Shinobu couldn't find a single public telephone. Instead, she became completely fascinated by the store windows. They displayed all kinds of electronic gadgets and strange devices unlike anything she had ever seen. Nothing resembled the little cookware shops, toy stores, or household businesses they knew in downtown Tomobiki. A few minutes later, Ataru came running back. Nothing, he said between breaths. Then he let out a sigh. I guess we only have one choice left. We'll have to go to my house. Yours or mine. Mine is closer. Then let's go. With a gentle smile, Ataru held out his hand. Shinobu took it naturally, as if they were simply walking home after an ordinary visit. As they made their way through the streets, everything felt strangely familiar. They recognized the neighborhood, and yet, something had changed. The old white streetlights had been replaced by warm, reddish-orange lamps, giving the entire district a completely different atmosphere. Eventually, they arrived in front of Ataru's house. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately. To their complete surprise, it wasn't Ataru's father or mother standing there. Instead, a young man about their own age looked back at them. He stared for a few seconds. Then a warm smile spread across his face. Mom! Dad! You're finally back! Ataru and Shinobu froze. The young man smiled casually while continuing to focus on a strange black rectangular device about the size of a calculator. Its entire surface looked like a sheet of glass, and he manipulated it effortlessly with his fingers without taking much notice of them. Finally, he looked up. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Ataru and Shinobu exchanged bewildered glances. Like what? Ataru asked. So young. He laughed softly. You actually look pretty good like that. This has to be another one of Inasumi's tricks. Neither Ataru nor Shinobu had the slightest idea who this young man was, or why he had just called them mom and dad. The two remained frozen in the doorway, completely speechless. The young man hardly seemed to notice. He simply returned his attention to the mysterious glass device in his hands. After a few more seconds, he looked up again. So, are you two going to stand there all night? Or are you coming inside? Ataru and Shinobu looked at each other once more. Without saying a word, they stepped inside. The moment they stepped inside, both of them stopped in amazement. Everything in the house had changed. The furniture was arranged almost the same way as before, but its design looked unlike anything they had ever seen. Shinobu gently nudged Ataru with her elbow and pointed toward the wall. A huge flat screen was built right into it, almost like a window or a giant framed picture. Just then, a woman's voice echoed from deeper inside the house. "Kokoru? Who's at the door?" A woman walked down the hallway. Ataru and Shinobu's eyes widened. It was Ataru's mother. About 20 years had passed since they had last seen her. She was no longer the elegant young woman in her early 30s they remembered. Now, she was a graceful woman approaching her 50s, though the clever sparkle and playful smile in her eyes had never changed. The moment she saw them, she smiled warmly. "Ataru, Shinobu, what on earth happened to you?" She looked them up and down before letting out a small laugh. "Although, now that I think about it, you should stay like this. I suppose Inazumi has been up to her tricks again." She chuckled to herself. "Maybe I should ask her to do the same for me. These stairs get harder to climb every year. They remind me of when you two were still young." Ataru felt his heart skip a beat. "Mom." Shinobu could barely find her voice. "Mrs. Moroboshi." The two of them stood there in stunned silence. There was no longer any doubt. Not only had they arrived in another universe, they had also traveled roughly 20 years into the future. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Moroboshi walked over and opened the door. A lively young Oni girl floated happily inside with a bright smile. She wore a stylish miniskirt and a tight lycra top that, together with her little horns and long flowing hair, gave her a charming and modern appearance. She drifted effortlessly above the floor. "Hello, Mrs. Moroboshi." "Hello, Mr. Moroboshi." "You both look wonderful." Without wasting a second, she hurried over to Kokeru and wrapped her arms around him. Laughing cheerfully, she floated around him in circles while covering him with kisses. "Come on, Kokeru. Everyone's waiting for us." Mrs. Moroboshi crossed her arms and shook her head with an amused sigh. "Young people, they never think about anything except parties." Kokeru smiled awkwardly, while the Oni girl happily dragged him toward the front door. Through the doorway, Ataru and Shinobu caught sight of a sleek convertible sports car parked outside. Several young men and women were already inside, laughing and chatting excitedly. The car glided smoothly down the street before disappearing into the night. Mrs. Moroboshi closed the door and turned back toward them. "So, it wasn't her who did this to you?" Both of them shook their heads. "What exactly happened?" A few moments later, Ataru and Shinobu sat together in the living room, while Mrs. Moroboshi kindly served them each a cup of tea. Slowly, they began telling her everything that had happened during the past several weeks. Their journey across countless universes, the endless chases, the battles, and the accident that had ultimately brought them to this strange world. And apparently, 20 years into the future as well. Still sitting in what was technically their own living room 2 decades later, Ataru and Shinobu remained side by side, their hands still clasped together, listening in disbelief as Mrs. Moroboshi summarized everything that had happened over those missing 20 years. "So, you two eventually got married, and Kokeru is your son." Ataru could barely process the words. Shinobu looked even more stunned. "That's incredible." Ataru turned toward her in surprise. "What do you mean, incredible? Is it really that hard to imagine yourself ending up married to me?" Shinobu folded her arms. "Considering some of the ridiculous things you do, there are times when I seriously wonder." After a brief silence, Ataru looked around the room. "Where's Dad?" Mrs. Moroboshi sighed with obvious annoyance. "I'd rather not talk about that womanizer. He got married again. Now he's living on planet Oni with one of those alien girls." "Wow," Ataru murmured. "I never imagined you two would actually split up." Shinobu looked at her curiously. "And you never remarried?" Mrs. Moroboshi smiled with quiet resignation. "No. I'd rather be alone than with the wrong person." After another short silence, Ataru asked, "Then, where are our counterparts in this world?" "I'm not completely sure. At this hour, Ataru should still be at work, and Shinobu is probably teaching one of her yoga classes." The two teenagers exchanged another glance. "Would it bother you if we went to see them?" "Of course not." Mrs. Moroboshi smiled. "Are you planning to stay long?" "Just a day or two." A friend of ours is trying to repair the device that brought us to this universe. Perfect. Then I'll prepare the guest room for both of you. A few minutes later, the two of them left the house. Ataru headed toward the office where, according to his mother, his future self worked. Shinobu, meanwhile, made her way toward the gym where her future counterpart was supposed to be. Ataru walked alone through the dark streets of this futuristic Tomobiki, unable to hide his amazement at everything the city had become over the years. The streets were the same, yet somehow they were completely different. Most of the old neighborhood shops had disappeared. In their place stood brightly lit bars, karaoke clubs, and exotic restaurants whose delicious aromas blended together until it was impossible to tell what kind of food they served. At nearly every corner, beautiful young women dressed in bunny costumes and waitresses wearing stylish miniskirts handed out flyers, cheerfully trying to attract customers. Completely captivated by one particularly pretty promoter, Ataru couldn't resist flirting back. The young woman smiled knowingly. She was certain she'd found another easy customer. Just then, a group of men walked down the street, apparently on their way home from work. One of them casually placed a hand on Ataru's shoulder. He turned around. The face staring back at him looked strangely familiar. Glasses. Although much older now, he was impossible to mistake. His hair was gone. Years of office work had left deep lines across his tired face. The older man frowned. "Aren't you a little too young to be wandering around here?" Ataru burst into laughter. "Wow. Time hasn't been very kind to you, Glasses. You look like an old man." The man's face tightened with anger, but only for a moment. Almost instantly, his expression changed to complete disbelief. "Impossible. Guys, come over here!" The others turned around. They were Chibi, Perm, and Gorilla. All of them were older now, dressed in business suits, their exhausted faces showing the weight of countless years spent working. The moment they saw Ataru, they laughed and playfully slapped him on the back. He must be Ataru's son. Looks about 17. That shameless idiot. Poor Shinobu. I don't think she'd want to know. Chibi awkwardly scratched his head. Everybody knows that pig was the biggest womanizer in all of Tomobiki. But look at him. He looks exactly like Ataru. Gorilla stared in amazement. Glasses still couldn't believe what he was seeing. I wonder who the mother is. Rinosuke? Maybe? It would have had to happen about 20 years ago. Ataru listened to every word in complete confusion. The thought that meeting these people might somehow change his future, or even destroy his marriage with Shinobu, suddenly became a frightening possibility. Without another word, he quietly slipped away from the group and hurried down the brightly illuminated streets. I'd better not attract any more attention. This could cause problems for my future self. As he continued walking, he remembered what his mother had told him. The office where his future self worked now stood where an old arcade had once been. A sleek, modern office complex had replaced it. Just as he reached the corner, someone stepped out of the building. Ataru stopped dead in his tracks. It was him, his older self. Before he could call out to him, a huge white limousine pulled up beside the curb. The doors swung open. 4 men dressed in black suits and dark sunglasses stepped out with military precision. Without hesitation, they grabbed the older Ataru and shoved him hard against a wall. A 5th man climbed out from the chauffeur's seat. He wore a flawless white suit. His black hair was perfectly slicked back. Hidden behind a utility pole, Ataru watched everything while holding his breath. Then his eyes widened. Shutaro Mendo. The memory came rushing back immediately. The arrogant heir to the Mendo family, one of the richest families in Japan. Perhaps even the richest in the entire world. Curious, Ataru leaned forward, trying to hear why the wealthiest man in Japan had come to confront his future self. The argument was already growing heated. Mendo pointed an elegant cane directly at the older Ataru's face while shouting furiously, "You promised this would be finished by the end of the month. And this is the garbage you hand me? There's no way we can present a project like this to the holding. I can't believe I trusted you. The only reason we hired you was because of Shinobu, and because we've known each other since school. But now I see that was a mistake." The older Ataru fell to his knees in desperation. "Mendo, please. You have to give me more time. A project like this can't be completed in just a few weeks." You have to understand. But Mendo's expression never softened. You have no idea how much this delay has cost us. Do you realize how much money we've lost because of you? You're fired. With those cold words, Mendo turned away. His bodyguards escorted him back to the limousine. The long white car pulled smoothly into traffic before disappearing beneath the city's dazzling lights. The older Ataru remained on his knees, completely devastated. Still hiding behind the utility pole, the younger Ataru watched silently as his future self slowly brushed the dust from his clothes. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of defeat. Then, a woman's voice suddenly broke the silence. Ataru! Ataru! A woman stood across the street with a small child beside her. They were calling to him. The younger Ataru couldn't recognize either of them. His older self looked up. The instant he saw them, panic filled his face. Without saying a word, he turned and ran through the crowded streets of futuristic Tomobiki. The woman and the child remained frozen where they stood, watching helplessly as he disappeared into the sea of people. The younger Ataru could barely contain himself. There were countless questions he wanted to ask his future self. He had been so close. Close enough to finally learn the truth about the life that awaited him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Shinobu wandered through the streets, completely captivated by how much Tomobiki had changed. Where public bathhouses had once stood, modern apartment buildings now reached toward the sky. The little neighborhood stores had given way to a massive supermarket. Farther ahead, the dazzling lights of an enormous shopping mall illuminated the night. Everything felt unfamiliar, yet strangely nostalgic at the same time. She couldn't hide her excitement. In just a few more minutes, she would finally meet the woman she herself would become 20 years from now. But before reaching the gym, someone caught her attention. A lone man was walking through the shadows between two buildings. He wore a long trench coat, a hat, and a pair of dark sunglasses. Shinobu frowned. Mr. Moriboshi? The man slightly raised one hand at the sound of her voice. Mr. Moriboshi? He barely turned his head, then immediately quickened his pace, pretending he hadn't heard her. That only made Shinobu even more curious. According to Mrs. Moriboshi, Ataru's father was living on planet Oni. So, who was this man? Without making a sound, she quietly followed him. The mysterious stranger crossed several streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. Eventually, he entered an old motel. To Shinobu's surprise, the place was still standing after all these years. At the front desk, the man picked up a room key and hurried upstairs. Just as he was about to unlock the door, Shinobu gently grabbed his arm. Mr. Moriboshi, it's so nice to see you. The man spun around in shock. As he slowly removed his sunglasses, Shinobu felt as though time itself had stopped. It wasn't Ataru's father. It was Ataru, 20 years older. A few faint wrinkles framed his face, and he looked far more mature. But those mischievous eyes and that unmistakable expression were exactly the same. Shinobu? He whispered in complete disbelief. You look so young. Before she could answer, the motel room door opened. A familiar female voice drifted into the hallway. Darling, what took you so long? I was just about to leave. Slowly, Shinobu raised her eyes. Her breathing stopped. Standing inside the motel room was Lum, or rather, a much older version of Lum. She was taller, just as beautiful, just as captivating. She wore elegant black lace lingerie beneath a luxurious crimson robe. The way she and Ataru looked at each other left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. In this universe, Ataru and Lum were lovers. At that very instant, Lum suddenly looked toward the hallway. Shinobu. The older Ataru quickly turned around, but it wasn't the young Shinobu he knew. Standing at the far end of the corridor was the woman Shinobu had come to meet. Her own future self. The real wife of this older Ataru. And she had just discovered the affair her husband had apparently been hiding. No one knew for how many years, with the alien invader who had changed all of their lives decades before. The older Shinobu stood perfectly still. Her face was frozen somewhere between shock, rage, and heartbreak. Shinobu, it's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. But it was already too late. In that instant, everyone completely forgot that a 17-year-old Shinobu was standing there as well. The hallway exploded into chaos. Voices rose. Arguments erupted. Accusations flew in every direction. Ataru desperately tried to defend himself. Lum struggled to explain. Meanwhile, the older Shinobu calmly turned toward the man standing beside her. Take pictures. Everything. The room. The two of them together. Everything. The man immediately raised his camera and began taking photograph after photograph. Without changing her expression, she said coldly, I need enough evidence for the divorce. The young Shinobu remained frozen. She couldn't process what she had just witnessed. This wasn't the future she had imagined. Without saying another word, she turned around and ran. A few streets away, she suddenly ran into Ataru. The Ataru from her own world. He had also been following his future self, but after losing him around a corner, he'd never managed to catch up. Shinobu, I'm glad I found you. The moment he saw her face, his smile vanished. What's wrong? Shinobu remained silent. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. Then, without warning, she pounded both fists against Ataru's chest. You pig! How could you do that to me? Ataru stared at her in complete confusion. What? With what are you talking about, Shinobu? You two. You were lovers all that time. What? The motel. Love. Her voice broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to explain everything she had seen. Ataru simply stood there, unable to understand a single word. As Shinobu finally broke down crying, he gently wrapped his arms around her and softly stroked her hair. It's okay. Calm down, Shinobu. Shinobu continued sobbing in Ataru's arms. Did you find them? What happened? Through her tears, she slowly told him everything. The mysterious man in the trench coat, the old motel, Lum waiting inside the room, the arrival of her older self, the photographs, the evidence for the divorce. Everything that, in this universe, seemed destined to destroy Ataru and Shinobu's marriage. When she finally finished, Ataru gently cupped her face in his hands and looked straight into her eyes. Shinobu, listen to me. She slowly raised her head. They're not us. Shinobu remained silent. This is another world, another dimension, another reality. He paused for a moment. Do you remember that apocalyptic universe? Do you remember that Lum who only pretended to love me? Little by little, Shinobu's tears began to fade. Yes. Just because they look like us, doesn't mean they are us. And just because they're another version of us, doesn't mean we're destined to live the same lives. A gentle smile crossed Ataru's face. You and I, we get to choose our own future. Those simple words finally reached Shinobu's heart. She took a slow, deep breath. You're right. Lowering her eyes in embarrassment, she gave him a faint smile. I'm sorry. For a moment, I was so angry. It felt as if it had really been us. Ataru smiled warmly. It's okay. Shinobu inhaled deeply, calming herself at last. So, what do we do now? Ataru glanced toward the park in the distance. I think we've seen more than enough. Then he pointed down the street. Let's go find the box. Before we get ourselves into even more trouble. Shinobu nodded. You're right. This whole thing is starting to scare me. A few seconds later, she suddenly remembered something. That girl who was with our son, Ataru thought for a moment. She was probably Lum and Rei's daughter. Shinobu's eyes widened. You noticed it too? He nodded. It was pretty obvious. For a while, they walked in silence, still holding hands. Finally, Shinobu spoke again. It's amazing. Maybe their children have happier lives than ours ever will. Ataru immediately shook his head. Don't be ridiculous. He looked at her with a confident smile. We're going to make sure our future is even better. Shinobu couldn't help smiling back. Together, hand in hand, they continued walking toward the park. A few minutes later, there it is, Ataru pointed excitedly. The strange little box was resting beside a fountain. Both of them approached cautiously. The device was making soft mechanical noises, and a faint light pulsed beneath its surface. When did it start doing that? Shinobu wondered. She looked around nervously. We're lucky nobody found it. Someone could have mistaken it for a bomb. Ataru stared at the bizarre device. A bomb would be less dangerous than this thing. At that exact moment, his hand accidentally brushed against the box. Something activated. The surface of the device suddenly burst into light. The glow spread rapidly across the entire park. Ataru and Shinobu barely had time to react. What's happening? The ground vanished beneath their feet. Once again, they were swallowed by an immense tunnel of energy. Still holding hands, their bodies spun endlessly through the vortex. dragged deep into the currents of space and time, toward another world, toward another uncertain destiny. To be continued.